Shalom, holy brothers and sisters. This week's Bible portion is Parshat Vayikra. It's the first Bible portion in the book of Leviticus that comes right after Exodus. And this week's portion corresponds with chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 5, verse 26. And it deals with all of the different animal sacrifices that we're asked to make for all of the different reasons, for a sin offering, for a daily offering, to say you're sorry for something that you might have done and you weren't sure if you did. All of the details of what animals were sacrificed, when, how, where even to place them on the altar are all outlined in this week's Bible portion. So sacrifices are something that is a little bit hard to understand in this day and age. In Hebrew, the word korban comes from the root karov, which means close. And the intention is that it is something that makes us have a close relationship with the Almighty, providing the sacrifice. Now, of course, God doesn't need us to sacrifice animals for him, but it was something that he gave us to do so that we would feel like we had some tangible way to please the Almighty. If a person was poor and could not afford a ram or one of the other more expensive animals that were sacrificed, they could offer a dove offering, and if they couldn't even afford a dove, they could also offer wheat with oil. And this week's Bible portion deals with the fact that our happiness depends on closeness, karov, the root of sacrifice with the Almighty. And these ideas are from Rabbi Zelig Pliskin's book, Growth Through Torah. He also takes a verse that teaches us to acknowledge the gifts that we have received from the Almighty. He says to be yourself and be certain to utilize your full potential. And this comes from chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Every meal offering that you offer to the Almighty, do not make it chametz. For you shall burn no yeast nor honey in any offering of the Almighty made by fire. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. So yeast and honey were not permitted in the offerings on the altar. Yeast makes the dough rise higher, but it is an external additive. Just like in Passover, which is coming up in April, we don't eat bread, or we eat matzah, we eat unleavened bread, and it does not contain yeast because yeast represents the ego, because it's something that inflates the bread. Honey makes things taste sweeter, but it is also an external additive. Salt, on the other hand, brings out the flavor in the food, but only the flavor that is already there. So this is a reminder of a metaphor for us also to bring out the best in us, but to be ourselves. He says also, when you are in the position of power, have courage to admit your mistakes. This comes from chapter 4, verse 22. If the king commits a sin by unintentionally violating one of the Almighty's commandments, which he should not have done. So regardless of our position, of our status, of how important we think we are, we're never too important to apologize. And that just shows humility and makes the people who we are in a leadership position respect us even more, because we are human and we're not putting ourselves above anybody else. Feeling embarrassed for doing wrong is a sign of having positive values. So this is something that you can see with children a lot. I know I can see it with my daughter. She knows when she makes a mistake, and sometimes she even puts herself in timeout because she feels so bad about it. So that's a good sign of a healthy conscience, and that comes from chapter 4, verse 31. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. And then a couple last lessons from this week's Bible portion. Each person is obligated to give charity according to his means. So, of course, we cannot give what we do not have, and we are obligated to give 10% tithe, and on top of the 10% tithe, another 10% of charity. So 20% charity, which, now that we have taxes in the countries that we live in and social services and welfare services coming out of our taxes, sometimes it could be a little bit hard to know, like, did I already give enough because it was already taken out of my check, or do I need to give on top of that? So we should really give as much as we can, because it's God's money after all. We can't take money in the afterlife, and it'll all come back to us in the form of karma. It comes from chapter 5, verse 11. If he does not have the financial means for 2 turtle doves or for 2 young pigeons, then he shall bring his offering for his transgression, the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering. So accommodations can be made for people of any financial means. And lastly is to internalize biblical wisdom and biblical values to such a degree that you will not forget them. And this comes from chapter 5, verse 17. And if any person will sin and violate one of the commandments of the Almighty, which he should not have done, and he did not know, he is guilty and shall bear his iniquity. So whenever we make a mistake, in Hebrew the word for sin is chet, and it means to miss the mark. So there's no real actual word for sin, but it's roughly translated as sin. Whenever we miss the mark, whenever we do something that is not ideal, when we do something that is not good, then we should always try to make amends. So the sin offering is for that. And one of the videos that I saw about the Parsha, they talked about how in this day and age, we don't have sacrifices, animal sacrifices anymore. And so the offering that we have is our prayer. And just like the sacrifices were made back in those days 3 times a day, so too do we nowadays pray 3 times a day. And it corresponds with our offering supplication and asking for forgiveness and atonement, and kind of like apologizing for our mistakes on a daily basis so that we can be renewed and forgiven. So that's it for this week's Bible portion. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, share it, and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. Shabbat Shalom, and God bless you. Bye-bye.